I'm an amateur writer. I love writing stories, and in my brain, I write complete novels. I never finish them, at least so far. Um, so today I was walking and running, and I wrote a novel in my head, and then I came back to type it up. I remember one of my professors was um, in college, Dr. Jack Cottrell, and he um, was my professor, and he was talking to me and a few people in the class, about 5 of us, and he just said, "I got all this in my brain, I just wanna go type it out," because he was so, just so into his book that he was writing at the time, and I feel that now. But when I came back to type up the novel, and when I say type up the novel, I put down enough ideas of the novel, type it up enough to kinda get it out of my head, and then I leave it. I've got hundreds of them. But a cat was sitting in my chair. It's too cute to move. So, here we are. I'm just gonna tell you the novel off the top of my head. I'll miss points. I'll get lost in the story. I'll, uh, maybe write myself into a corner I can't get out of. But here you go. There was a certain man who wanted to be a professional football player. He was fast and strong and had all the characteristics of a good player. He played when he was little in the small town that he was from. He played in the street and he played in the grass fields. And then he played on little teams. He got bigger and stronger. And then, uh, before he could continue his life, it turned away from that direction that he wanted to go. He had an injury that took him out of the game of football for the rest of his life. And so um, he just admired football and he just had a simple job. And he watched the local football players and watched the local team and rooted them professional teams on the as many do would be football players root on their professional team. But down the road, there were some athletes who were practicing on a regular basis in an open field. And he just went by. He walked without a limp when anybody was watching him. And he watched them play often, encouraged them, found out they were a semi-professional football team. And so one day he dressed in his best dress and outfit and suit and tie and walked past them. Said, hey boys, how's it going? Being an elderly man, he got away with it. And they all said, we're doing good. We're practicing. We're a semi-pro team. And they told him their story and how they were trying to get their team to become more professional. And some of them had hopes of maybe going on, but most of them just loved the game, wanted to continue in their sport. And he felt a certain camaraderie with that feeling of wanting to take your ability as far as you can, as it will take you. And so he started to make little donations to that team, and he showed up at all their games. And though the team didn't have the national success that they would wanted, they all got extra practice equipment and money for just food, and sometimes just there would be. a uh, big display of snacks and drinks for after their practice and that kind of thing. And there he was in the field. And they all began to know him. And this elderly man sitting in the stands, rain and shine, practice and games. And sometimes they just called him the rich old man is here. That rich old man is here. And and then they noticed that he was walking slower to the stands, sitting on the first level rather than walking up. And then they noticed he was walking with a dog and walking very slowly, stopping. Some days he wasn't there as he normally was. And over time, they found that he had a heart condition and that he wasn't long for this world, perhaps. And they would visit him when he went into the hospital, and he'd have to be in there for a while. And they would talk about, hey, the rich old man's in the hospital, and after the practice, they go visit him. And over time, his stays became longer, and then he would be at home. Then he was in the hospital and unconscious for a while, and they came in to talk with him, but he didn't respond. And one player stayed with him. No family showed up. And the player was his only family. The game of football, his only diversion from the difficulties of his life. But the players didn't know that the elderly man was very poor, and all his extra money, other than the rent from his little house, the food for his dog and food for himself, everything else he gave to the team. As if it was the team that he always wanted to be on. And he woke up and he sees the player sitting there, and he says, how's the team going? And the player said, very good. Very good, sir. How are you doing? And the elderly man said, I'm doing very good. Thank you for being here, son. And the man then suddenly got more alert, and he looked around. He asked what day it was, and he realized he'd been in the hospital a couple days, and he looked at himself and he realized he was in a gown, and he asked the player, he said, can you see if my clothes are here? And the player found his clothes and his belongings, and the elderly man took the keys out of his pants pocket and handed it to the man and to the player, and the player took the keys, and the elderly man said, no one is there to feed my dog, and he's probably ate what I've set out for him. Can you go in every day until I get out of here and feed my dog? There's plenty of food set aside for him. So the player agreed, and every day he went and fed the man's dog, walked him in the backyard, cleaned up some of the mess that the dog had made in the house, and but what he kept to himself and from the rest of the team was the little modest house and meager possessions of the elderly rich man. And the man grew weaker. The elderly rich man grew weaker. And his fate would have it, as a divine intervention, horrible thing, a tragedy happened that was not foreseen or acceptable to any human upon this earth. And that was the sudden and tragic death of one of those football players. And that heart of that football player, the family said, check this for the elderly rich man. For they knew that he was always there and how sick he was. And it would not have occurred to them, but the hospital said, what about an organ donor? Is he an organ donor? And we're sorry to ask you, but the time is short in which we need to decide if we can give this heart to someone, if you want. And the family just made this decision, and again, divine intervention. It was the perfect match. And one of the players rode along with the heart as it was transported toward the elderly man, escorting the heart of his teammate to the heart, to the body of an elderly man that he loved. But the traffic was bad. The time was short. And against rules, against protocol, against what would seem right, the driver told the young man, I can't make it. There's a bad accident in front of us. And here, your player was in such a bad accident too, and now another accident is delaying this. So the young man who had trained in winter and summer, in all weather and conditions, and hills and sand and dirt, blood and sweat, took the packaged heart, its cold interior of a travel box, and ran. This story has happened in other times, in other places. The same thing, where the desperate hour of getting the transplanted heart or kidney or organ. But unless you're that man, that young man running with the heart of your teammate, you would not know. It's a story until you're the runner with life or death. And so, young man, he thought through the traffic flows and the streets. He knew this area as a young boy. He ran all those streets and cut all through the back roads. He ran down past roads and made his own path, and in places that were not designed for for people to walk, and he made his way to the hospital and came in, and everything was ready to go. But it's desperately, desperately late. The elderly man, they didn't know. But now there was no other heart patient or ready, and probably they would not have done the surgery. But there was no other option, no other patient available, ready, and the hour was minutes. And in the hospital, the operation began. A few months later, at a football game, memorial football game in honor of a loved one passed. On the sidelines, with many adoring fans, a dog stood, was petted, and the game was about to begin. And the players said, "This is for our departed teammate." His heart is here in our beloved elderly rich man.